What truly determines a person's resilience isn't how much they already know. It's how well they can teach themselves. Most people spend their time searching for motivation, the right method, or the perfect environment. But somewhere along the way, they forget that the most foundational skill of all is the ability to take ownership of your own learning. Self-directed learning isn't just about passing an exam or outperforming a colleague. It's the bedrock that allows you to survive and adapt in a world where technology, careers, and opportunities can shift overnight. Learning how to learn isn't simply a choice you make. It's essential gear for anyone who wants to go the distance. And in my own journey of exploring this topic, I came across something called the Sandbox Method, a practical framework for teaching yourself virtually anything. It was originally written by author Nat Eliason, and today we're going to unpack it together. Why does this method matter, and how can it genuinely transform the way you approach self-education? Let's find out. Welcome. This is Mindforce, and I'm your host, Asher. Here's a quote worth sitting with from Dr. Seuss of all people. Knowing how to learn something is better than knowing the thing itself. Throughout history, there has never been a time more favorable for self-education than right now. Want to learn a new skill? You open a browser, search, study, practice deliberately, and push yourself past your current limits. The tools are right there. And yet, despite having access to an almost overwhelming amount of information, very few people actually make the most of it for self-directed learning. Why? Because for most of our lives, we've been conditioned to believe that we need formal education in order to truly learn something. The reality, though, is proving that idea wrong every single day. More and more companies, especially startups and forward-thinking organizations, no longer require a university degree to qualify for certain roles. A growing number of successful people in today's world have built their expertise by teaching themselves, and there is absolutely no reason you can't do the same. Self-education can be your way out of a job you resent or a degree program you're indifferent toward. More than that, it is becoming a core competency of the 21st century. The key driver of your ability to adapt as job categories and technologies keep expanding. The real question is, how do you make the most of all the information available to you so you can genuinely grow your own skills? The first step is rethinking the way we've been taught to learn. In school, university, and most formal educational settings, the model we're trained in builds a particular kind of mindset, one of waiting to receive information rather than going out to find it. Your performance is measured by grades. Grades are based on tests, exams, and assignments, and those are based on how well you apply the information that was handed to you. For at least 12 years, most of us were trained to repeat and reproduce what we were fed. We were never really taught how to go find that information ourselves. No teacher ever walked into the classroom and said, "Figure out how to build a website by tomorrow," and then walked out. What actually happened is that the teacher showed you how to build the website, then expected you to follow the steps exactly as demonstrated. But the real world doesn't work that way. If you want to do anything meaningful in any field, you have to figure out how to solve problems before anyone has handed you a solution. The learning model most of us internalize looks something like this. First, receive the solution, then receive the problem, finally, apply the solution to the problem. If it works, great. If not, repeat steps 2 and 3. What this really comes down to is trial and error, and that turns out to be a far more powerful problem-solving method than most people give it credit for. When you teach yourself something, there's no curriculum, no notes, no textbook, no professor walking you through each step. You move from one problem to the next, gradually getting better at guessing and experimenting. You don't need formal education in a subject. You need the capacity to experiment, to push yourself, and to respond to feedback. But because most of us have been fed knowledge for years, learning this way can feel genuinely uncomfortable at first. The good news is that this capacity for self-directed learning can absolutely be developed or redeveloped. And one of the most effective ways to start is through a technique called the Sandbox Method. The Sandbox Method is a continuous self-education process built on the latest research into how we actually learn and process information. At its core, it shifts the focus away from memorizing facts, formulas, and isolated details. Instead, it's about developing an intuitive understanding of the skills you want to build. By immersing yourself in information about those skills and constantly challenging yourself to improve. You can practice this method on your own with a mentor at school or work and at any stage of life. It's a cycle of continuous learning and improvement broken down into 4 steps. Let's walk through each one. Before you spend a single hour researching how to learn something, you need to create an environment where you can actually practice it. According to the Sandbox Method, the majority of your time should go toward practicing and experimenting, not passive studying. So you need a space where you can freely develop and tinker with the skill you're trying to build. Think of it as your personal playground, a place where you can mess around, explore, and even fail without any lasting consequences for your finances, your reputation, or your day-to-day life. This is the environment that makes accelerated learning possible. A good sandbox has 3 core qualities. First, it should be low cost or free, so there's no friction stopping you from getting started. Second, it should feel playful, meaning you're not terrified of failing or sharing what you're working on. Third, it should be public enough that you feel some accountability to do the work with genuine care. Here are some examples. For programming, create an account on GitHub, Heroku, or Stack Exchange to start projects and ask for help. For writing, launch a personal blog on WordPress, Medium, or Squarespace. For photography, use a camera and an Instagram account. For design, work with tools like Sketch and use a Dribbble account to showcase your work. For marketing, build a blog or an informational page on WordPress. Whatever you want to learn, you need a sandbox ready before you begin. If you can't find a simple, accessible way to practice and show your work, you'll learn much more slowly and struggle to get meaningful feedback. Yes, sharing your work while you're still a beginner is intimidating, but it helps you get comfortable with others seeing your creative output before it's polished. Before you've become an expert. The school system conditioned us to fear judgment by measuring everything through grades. If you can push past that underlying fear and start sharing what you're doing with communities in your field, you'll improve much faster and build genuinely valuable connections. Once your sandbox is ready, it's time to start researching. To keep expanding your sandbox and increasing the level of skill you can practice and apply, you'll need to invest some time in research. The good news is that online resources exist to teach you virtually anything. The challenge is figuring out what's actually worth your attention. In the beginning, the most useful type of information to look for is what Nat Eliason calls formulas, clear, concise instructions that you can immediately apply and practice in your sandbox. If you don't practice what you've studied, you won't truly learn it. So as you develop a skill, look for resources that expand your understanding and give you something new to experiment with. Books are among the most valuable resources available. They've been written, edited, and refined far more rigorously than most online content. Books can help you improve your photography, sharpen your marketing instincts, understand how the human mind works, or learn how to learn more effectively. They're especially valuable for deepening your grasp of a craft and exposing you to mental models and dimensions of a skill you may never have considered on your own. You can even use books to learn technical skills like programming. One approach is to work through textbooks until you know enough to troubleshoot on your own, using resources like Stack Overflow. Blogs and online resources are another rich source of practical knowledge. There are excellent written guides on how to self-teach marketing, design, JavaScript, and almost anything else you can think of. When you're swimming in a sea of online information, finding a blog or resource that helps you identify what to prioritize can be enormously valuable. A simple Google search will often surface a great article, a Reddit thread, or a relevant Quora discussion to kick off your research. Online courses are ideal if you prefer watching and listening over reading. The internet is full of both free and paid courses covering everything from coding and marketing to design and even knitting. Some universities share free recordings of their classes. MIT's OpenCourseWare, Harvard's Open Courses, and dozens of other institutions offer freely accessible material. On top of that, there are dedicated learning platforms built specifically for self-directed study. Personally, I've used Skillshare, Khan Academy, Coursera, Codecademy, and Udemy. There are also outstanding teachers on YouTube and Teachable, as well as educators who have built their own courses entirely from scratch. Some of these can be expensive, but many are free, and sometimes the free options are genuinely better than the paid ones. One final note on research. Always take notes. Write down everything you're learning so you can refer back to it later. And consider making your notes public. Sharing what you're learning forces you to articulate your understanding clearly, in a way that someone else can follow. That act of clarification alone deepens your own comprehension significantly. Step 3. Apply and practice. The right way. Within your sandbox, how you practice matters just as much as what you choose to practice. The wrong approach can waste hours, days, even years. The right approach can bring you to a competitive level within months. The ineffective kind of practice that most people default to is what Anders Ericsson, in his book Peak, calls naive practice. Naive practice is how people fool themselves into thinking they're improving when they're actually not learning anything at all. Some examples: casually playing a competitive game like chess with a friend, replaying songs you already know how to play, trying a recipe once, and then only ever making that same dish. The problem with all of these is that you're not actually challenging yourself. When you go through the motions of naive practice, the chances are high that you'll improve very little, or not at all. What you need instead is deliberate, purposeful practice. Inside your sandbox, that means a few specific things. Be honest with yourself about where your current limits are and where you need to improve. Set goals that are slightly above your current ability, just enough to push you out of your comfort zone without overwhelming you. Practice with focused, undivided attention, and actively seek feedback in whatever form you can find it, then integrate that feedback into your next round of practice. That last part, feedback, is so critical that it deserves its own step. Once you've been practicing deliberately in your sandbox and continuing to research in order to fill gaps in your knowledge, the final piece of the self-education system is feedback. Think about it this way. If you want to improve your weightlifting form, it's nearly impossible to know whether you're moving correctly without a coach watching and correcting you. If you're learning a new language, it's very hard to know if your pronunciation is accurate without someone pointing out your mistakes. You can learn a great deal on your own, but without a coach, a teacher, or some kind of feedback mechanism, you'll eventually hit a ceiling. Or worse, you'll keep reinforcing bad habits that become harder to unlearn later. For some skills, you can find tools online that provide real-time feedback. Codecademy, for instance, tells you exactly where your code went wrong. More academically oriented platforms like Coursera test your comprehension as you go. But the best form of feedback is still a person, a teacher or coach who deeply understands what you're learning. A skilled mentor can provide the most accurate corrections, help you break through plateaus, and suggest how to structure your learning to avoid stagnation. If you don't have a mentor nearby, find one online. If you want to become a better writer, hire an editor on Upwork for feedback. If you're working on your fitness, find an online coaching service focused on your specific goals. If you're learning a new language, find a conversation partner on italki. You can even reach out to someone you admire and ask for small, specific pieces of advice. They won't be able to serve as a full tutor, but even a few targeted insights can be genuinely useful. Another option is to use less direct feedback loops like the market. If you're regularly publishing artwork, writing, photography, or music, you can start to understand what resonates and what doesn't based on how people respond. Just be careful here. Market feedback can pull you toward what's popular rather than what's excellent. 50 Shades of Grey is one of the best-selling books of all time, but it's probably not the model you want to be writing toward. Once you've worked through all 4 steps, building your sandbox, researching to improve your skill, applying that knowledge through deliberate practice, and gathering feedback, the next step is simply to do it again. When you reach a learning goal or feel genuinely comfortable with a particular aspect of a skill, that's the cue to return to the research phase. Figure out what else you need to learn. Adjust your sandbox so you can practice it effectively, then practice with purpose and integrate the feedback to keep pushing yourself forward. This is the self-learning loop, a continuous cycle of growth where you never stop improving and never truly hit a permanent ceiling. Now, there will be moments when you feel stuck. When that happens, it's worth pausing to diagnose the cause. Have you reached a plateau and need to learn how to break through it? Have you lost motivation and need to rebuild your system of self-encouragement? Or are you practicing consistently but not seeing progress? In which case, it might be time to go deeper into the principles of deliberate practice. Whatever the answer, remember this: self-learning is not a race to a finish line. It is a lifelong partnership with yourself. And when learning becomes that, something you choose, own, and return to again and again, it stops being a burden and starts becoming freedom. So I want to leave you with a question. What do you think is the most effective way to teach yourself something new? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Share them in the comments below so we can learn from each other. Thank you so much for listening. This is MindForce, and I'm Asher. See you soon.